Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Lunch with Books. Hello. Please come to order. Thank you. As I say, welcome to Lunch with Books and the return of the Wheeling Poetry series. I'll introduce our host in just a moment. I want to mention that next week at noon, Bonnie Thurston will be here. She has a new book called Not Sonnets, which is also poetry. And the week after that, we'll start a 2-week series on World War II, beginning with the Battle of Midway and then D-Day with 2 history professors. I wanted to mention that the Bill Burke photography exhibit is currently open. We have some of Bill's books here, just the small one and the large one, which are photographs taken in Wheeling in the 1970s. If you're interested, you can see me after. And also the Upper Ohio Valley Historical Review has just been published, the new one. So they're $5 a piece. You can also get it free as a PDF. So. Okay, like I said, we're resuming the Wheeling Poetry series, and the curator, I like to say curator because it sounds fancier, and the host is the Poet Laureate of West Virginia, Mark Harshman.
Thanks, Sean, very much. Thank you all for coming. I can never truly thank Sean or the Ohio County Public Library enough for supporting this series. As you look at your little booklets, you can see what it's really becoming quite an impressive list, not only of poets, but their work and the handsome job they do in producing this booklet and turning out an audience. You can ask any of our poets, including today's Amy, that we don't always get an audience for poetry. So we're very happy that each of you are here today. I'll just say one other word. Maybe Sean, you can help me here in a minute. Coming up, I think as soon as next month, we'll have another installment in the Wheeling Poetry series. Jeff Worley will be here, past Poet Laureate of the state of Kentucky, a magnificent poet, also that rare thing that I am not as a poet. He's also very funny. So I encourage you to come out for a Tuesday in June. So July. Okay, I was off on one. Okay, great. So let me introduce today's reader. Amy Alvarez is a poet, an educator, and a scholar. Her work focuses on race, ethnicity, gender, nationality, systemic injustice, and civil rights. She has been awarded fellowships from all kinds of places, including the Furious Flower Poetry Center. I had to say that was such a great name. And CantoMundo and others. Her poetry has appeared or is forthcoming in nationally and internationally recognized journals such as Ploughshares, New Ohio Review, River Styx, Colorado Review, Crazyhorse, Alaska Quarterly Review, PRISM International, elsewhere. And let me say, those are all major magazines. Amy was born in New York City to Jamaican and Puerto Rican parents. She has taught English and Humanities courses at public high schools in the Bronx, West Virginia, the Bronx, New York, and Boston. She now lives in Morgantown and teaches at WVU. And I might add that her essential project at the moment is her co-editing of a forthcoming anthology from WVU Press titled Essential Voices of the Vulnerable, an anthology exploring how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected vulnerable groups. It sounds to me like a must-read for all of us. I very much look forward to hearing Amy tell us a little bit more about this volume, if she will. As for her poems, I feel as if we're especially fortunate to have Amy with us now. For I can't help but think she is, to use this word again, soon to be one of the essential voices in American poetry. Her keen eye and ear deliver such amazing detail. Listen to this opening of the poem. I could almost mistake this gold peninsula for gospel. As morning's first fishermen nestle poles in sand, searching for hungry mouths, pelicans fly single file, wingtips stirring surf. Black-headed gulls are more polite than their northern cousins, only speaking when spoken to. Clouds tower against dawn's pink innards. Those words for a poem that will go on to reflect profoundly, if subtly, upon what it means to be other than white in America. Only great poets can use all the details around them, including the natural landscape, as Amy does here, to reflect upon the issues of the day. And not just the natural world of landscape and animals, but hear this opening couplet from her poem 149th Street, which shows her ability to truly see all things, including that run up a woman's stocking. The psychic on the corner totes grocery bags past neon signs in her windows. Run in her stocking, inching up shin. We are very fortunate to have such a truly gifted younger poet with us today. Please welcome Amy Alvarez.
Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you so much, Mark, for inviting me.
Oh, you're welcome.
This is just delightful. I'm so happy to be here. I love public libraries. My very first job was in a public library in Queens, New York, and I am just always so happy to be in any library at all. As he just mentioned, my parents are from Puerto Rico and from Jamaica, and although not from West Virginia, I definitely feel kind of a kindred spirit with the mountains, given that there are mountains in Puerto Rico, mountains in Jamaica, where my family is from, and that my parents, although I grew up in New York City, kind of made me an outdoorsy kid. So the first poem I'm going to read is called Jibara Negra, which basically translates to Black Hillbilly. Jibara Negra. This is how it begins. With my mother born in Spanish Town, with my father born in Ponce. I was born on the island of Manhattan, my umbilical cord buried in a midtown dumpster. We are all island people, even if I sound like a gringa, sound like I am from foreign. I'm a city girl, but my parents taught me to be a jibara, at home on horses, in a tent, in El Campo, with dirt under my fingernails from the garden, with my hands curled around a lizard's tail. This poem is entitled Dominant Recessive, kind of going back to the Punnett Square, if you remember that from high school biology. And it's kind of about my experience having taken a genetic test to kind of figure out what my family heritage was. And so it kind of goes into looking at the history of colonization through perspective of my own genes. So it's kind of what this is. Dominant recessive. If anyone is familiar with that kind of process of going on to, can folks hear me in the back okay? No? Okay. If I bring this up a little bit, is that better? Sorry? Oh, okay, I can just speak louder too. I've got teacher voice. I can definitely turn it up a little bit. Is that better? Can you hear me now in the back there? Okay. Okay. Is that a bit better? Yeah. Okay, great. All right. So, dominant recessive. Spit in a tube. Wait. Wait for a list of diseases you might pass on to future generations. For a chart focused on 46 slivers of fragmented past. 460 generations ago, my mitochondrial mother strode Central African plains. She stroked stars with Bantu songs. Cristobal Colon, devil in explorer's pantaloons, called Tainos shapely of body and handsome of face. He hacked off their hands before the Spanish named Borinquen Puerto Rico, before Jamaica became Jamaica. Gilt veins of their survival thread through my own, shards of their language still strewn across our tongues. Canoa, barbacoa, huracan. Casta paintings showed Spanish monarchs what happened when their sailors mated with Indians and later with Africans. Paintings featured mixed families, man, woman, and child. They suspected European blood would scrub color clear after a few generations. When Africanness did not disappear, they named the children mulatto, lobo, cochino, alvarezado. They named them no te entiendo, I don't understand you. Tente en el aire, worthless. Then they stopped painting. Somehow we have survived, a line of untocables. double helix of stardust fallen over whatever land we found after sea. Scattered ancestry paints a colorful quilt of chromosome across my computer screen, a heterozygous history, one of many possible outcomes. I tire of trying to decipher the patterns of history. I stand outside, study her same stars, and sing. Can folks hear now a little bit better? It seems like it. All right. Easter Mass, 1987. That day was no different. I was boredom bound in lace. My mother tried to save our souls. Mass, half Latin, a white priest in gold vestments, Sunday after Sunday. Peace be with you. And also, Jesus hung bloody behind the priest, reason we came here. His hand-dog face, bloody even on Resurrection Sunday. Still dying, despite the hymns, Hallelujah. Make a ham, my grandmother commanded, but I'd never liked eating pigs, and my mother never liked to cook. So it was bun and cheese from Mrs. Lee's Jamaican bakery, beef patties with cocoa bread, ting, cola champagne. We ate at the park, our mouths stung from Scotch bonnet pepper, our souls wiped clean with holy. My mom, laughing for once, cheered for me, cold monkey bars behind my knees as I swung upside down, a sky of tree roots and parked cars, a ground of gray cloud falling into forever. And as we're kind of just thinking about all that's been happening in terms of women not having a whole lot of choice in terms of what they get to do for their health, I went to read this poem called Date of Last Period. It's in an anthology called Choice Words, Writers on Abortion. Date of Last Period. The first time I had my period, we had burnt Jamaican beef patties and broccoli for dinner. Blood came as surprise and not. All the other girls in my grade had already bled. The cheery red on my white cotton underwear would readmit me to their ranks. Over dinner, Mom explained pregnancy, endgame of this bleeding between my legs. Terrified of tearing, as she described, I kept my legs closed for the next 7 years. No glimpses, a finger, even tampons threatened the flower. It took a team of 3 girls outside a stall door, barking instructions, tilt back, put one foot on the edge of the seat before anything could enter. The first night I didn't get my period. I don't remember what I ate. He and I talked about whether this was what we wanted under a dim pendant lamp over the kitchen table. I decided on pills. I remember feeling my body readjust, like swaying at boat's bottom, that gentle, watery nausea. I remember mucus, and finally the joy blood brought, bright red with clots the color of crushed violets. I'm going to jump ahead to a poem that is brand new, as in I printed it off last night and kind of wrapped it up. This is a poem that I was asked to write for an anthology that's coming up, which is titled Writing the Land, and they're having an entire kind of series about West Virginia, kind of looking at food justice and looking at land. So I was invited to go to a farm in Fayetteville called New Roots, run by women. And I wrote a bunch of poems. I went to a farm in the winter, which was kind of an interesting time to be there. So, postcards from New Roots Farm. 1. I drive across New River Gorge Bridge, longest single arch bridge in our hemisphere, hovering over the second oldest river on the planet. The bridge was built the year my husband was born and 2 years after my parents met. That is, it is and is not that old on a human scale. The river, however, has been on this course for 65 million years, flowing northward. The river has seen it all: the retreat of glaciers, native people forcibly removed, the partition of West Virginia from its eastern neighbor, the birth of the Hellbenders. I stop at the abandoned house on the road leading to the farm. Its ghost stands patient lace at the window. 2. I am met by 2 young white women farmers, Kate and Flannery, the latter, of course, an English major. We walked through drifts of shin-high snow toward the greenhouses they built from wood and plastic the year before. The greenhouses were limbed with tiny lettuces, arugula, abundant rows of spinach and kale, all summer in a humid plastic hut. They showed me the rows of garlic they planted in the fall. Kate bounded with abandon at the green scapes just breaking through the surface, coffee nearly spilling from her mug. 3. The earth gives up its warmth, but the wind is still ice. I walk down the hill toward the pond and geese through fields that are fallow, except for the parts that a local farmer uses for hay. A century ago, the land was home to pit ponies. Ponies lived in mines and were brought down in the summer to breed. When the mine shut down, farmers raised cattle and pigs. Kate says that if you don't make hay, brambles grow in the fields. Just like you, land drifts back to self-protecting wildness. I'm flying over the border wall at Christmas. This morning, a girl dies of dehydration as she tries to cross the border I fly over. I gaze at Orion through pergola slats. I grip guilt tight as a plastic water bottle in my hand. On our way to Mayan pyramids, a highway island stone snake rears its head, its body entwined in bougainvillea. Obsidian, says the shaman, is the frozen blood of the planet. The black stone sits atop broken pottery, a woven mat on his altar. Only Christmas decor I've seen outside the resort, a child's drawing of Santa above a paper snowflake on the door of a small blue house. I'm gonna take a quick sip of water. How to date a white boy. 1, do not be his melanated test drive. You are no one's enigma or experiment. Find evidence, an old photo online or in a dusty shoebox under his bed. Do not feel flattered. 2, if you meet his parents, prepare for disappointment. You will want them to be pleased with your philosophy thesis, your grandma's pearls. You will hope they are immediately rude so you don't waste another fertile year on their son. They will invite you to a cookout. They will call it a barbecue, but it will be a cookout. Don't be upset when you overhear the grandmother say you were darker, smarter, prettier, more or less articulate than expected. She will be dead before the wedding, if there is one. 3, so you've fallen in love. Remind him before you create a joint Instagram account, before you adopt a shelter dog, that you wear the same MAC foundation number as Sandra Bland, that your brother looked like Tamir Rice when he was little. Before you argue names for imagined children, remind him of what could happen to a boy with your face. 4, so your white boy thinks you should move in together. Take him to ungentrified Bronx neighborhoods where old men play dominoes on the sidewalk and children have no bedtimes in summer. Take him to your favorite auntie's house. Let him get a tongue lashing from your hotep cousin while you help in the kitchen by taste testing arroz con pollo, collard greens, quinoa salad. 5, so your white boy has fallen in love with you. He has told off Johnny come-locally friends. But he is asking whether you have pondered whether it might be easier with someone browner than him, whether your parents, your best friend, your abuelita might be happier. Hold his hands in yours. Notice his red face, tear-filled eyes, and tell him the truth. Spring semester. The lanky brown boy who walks ahead of me wears a red leather jacket, so new I can hear it creaking. Hip-hop rasps tinny through his oversized headphones. His head bobs as the music comes to the place where he thinks he knows the words and lets spill. Shots fall, man down, it's a homicide. He mumbles as these lyrics fade, a brutal half haiku. These are the last words he will utter before he slips through blue doors ahead, begins another day of high school. Redbuds push from maple branches. We tread over ice and salt. Our path is narrow, slick, and steep. Thank you. This poem is entitled Lighting Candles on My Stoop, Watching the Wind Snuff Them Out. I wrote this in the summer of 2020 after the death of Breonna Taylor. I keep thinking about Breonna Taylor asleep between fresh sheets. I keep thinking about her skin cooling after a shower, about her hair wrapped in a satin bonnet. I keep thinking about what she may have dreamed that night. Keep thinking about her bedroom, whether she had painted it recently, argued with her partner about the undertones and the paint. This one a little more blue, this one more pink. I wonder whether she may have felt more at home now that she had chosen the color on the walls. I keep thinking about how she could use her hands to keep blood moving through a human heart, how she could use her hands to stanch the flow of blood until platelets arrived. I wonder how many times she heard, "Thank you for saving, please save me." I wonder how many nights she could. I keep thinking about her when I lie in bed at night, when I wake up and look in the mirror, when I walk to my front door. I keep thinking about the life she wanted to build. Whether she had her eye on a ring and was dropping hints to the man who chose to protect her, whether he was working on it, whether it was in his sock drawer already as he waited for the right time. I keep wondering why a Black woman's death alone can't begin the revolution, whether the sweet smoke rising to the heavens across the nation is offering enough. Aerodynamics. When I say my parents met on a plane, what I mean is my existence is airborne. What I mean is I am not from here, that my parents, my family still hover above an Americanness none of us can fully know, that we have been, or right now being, reborn as American, as Caribbean, as tear shape of a plane's wing, as propeller, as immigrant, as dreamer, as blue, as black, as brown, as success, as failure, as if this country's constitution, Manic Manifesto, was folded into a paper plane that landed right on Sally Hemings' lap, and she tossed it to Louverture, to Sharp, to Albizu Campos, as if we belonged here, as if we were meant to survive, as if. This is a poem I read with Mark in October.
One of the rare times we were out.
Yeah, one of the rare times we were out in the world. It's entitled Boondocks. And it kind of floats between English and the Filipino languages of Tagalog and Cebuano, and kind of plays with the origins of the word boondocks, which you're probably all familiar with. It actually comes from the Philippines, which is kind of wild. Boondocks. From Tagalog, bundok, and Cebuano, bukid, each meaning mountain, rurality, folded up land far from ocean, from Proto-Austronesian bundok, higher ground. When American soldiers menaced the Philippines after the nation declared independence from Spain, Filipinos used boondock as cover, descending on an army used to prairies, to brown faces protected sacred ground raging across open field instead of behind trees raining down fire on the boondocks. These soldiers birthed the bastard word boondocks in these mountains, migrating meaning toward remote country, hinterlands, where the people, in their estimation, in what really is the estimation of a 19-year-old American boy worth, were less civilized or civil. I imagined a boondock being watery wasteland and didn't expect it to mean mountain in my stepfather's first tongue, or in Cebuano, Cebu being part of the archipelago I know well, my time rich church folk, who proselytized to the choir, molding Protestants of Catholics, but also running clinics, providing materials to teachers, giving teens community, inviting young trans women out to hang out, delighting in sisterly love. I met my first out trans friend in Cebu at 15. She taught me the Cebuano word for cockroach as a gag, ok. Bakla, a Cebuano for gay man and trans woman. Bakla, bukid, beauty, bundok. Jennifer Lod was a bakla, Filipina beauty murdered by American Marine in a bathroom stall because his own desire was distasteful to him. He could not understand the forest of her boondocks. The murderer was released after 5 years of a 10-year sentence. He, and I don't bother naming the man from the boondocks because names are themselves honorifics, had air conditioning in his cell, was paid $250,000 while he twiddled the thumbs that held Jennifer's head in a toilet. The US military remained in the Philippines in exchange for vaccines. Babaylan, from the Austronesian Bailayan, the word for shaman in pre-colonial Philippines. A Babaylan was almost always a woman like Jennifer, shamans by nature, guided by spirits of ancestors who brought them back to their bodies after traveling to astral boondocks, until colonizers drove them into the mountains. I wish a medium beyond words to guide Jennifer back to her body. I wish an army of Bakla Babaylan, beautiful, fearless, thundering down the boondocks, fire streaming from their painted lips. And here's the poem that Mark introduced me with. I could almost mistake this Gold Peninsula for gospel. As morning's first fishermen nestle poles in sand, searching for hungry mouths, pelicans fly single file, wingtips stirring surf. Black-headed gulls are more polite than their northern cousins, only speaking when spoken to. Clouds tower against dawn's pink innards. A white family with a white dog ambles down shore. The mother smiles hard and wide for the black girlfriend her son has brought on family vacation. Right now, I would rather write pelicans than people. This among my many sins, an inability to look at the thing itself, refusing surprise. But I cannot ignore this fellow bespectacled brown girl, resplendent in her box braids, how she holds her boyfriend's hands, sliding her fingers between his over and over, one hand jetty, the other water. Appalachia to LGA. LGA, of course, is LaGuardia Airport in New York City, and oftentimes that is the direction that I am headed in as I kind of travel between my two homes, in Morgantown and back to where my parents live in New York. Appalachia to LGA. Through double plexiglass panes, I trace swirling river inlets and muddy deltas. White smoke flowers from the mouths of bottom-heavy smokestacks. In West Virginia, by God, I feel the boundary of dense green woodland, willowy fingers on my gasping throat. I'm not of these mountains. I am Queens concrete, endless signs in every alphabet. I am from subway cars and women therein who weep, who hold on to grocery bags while the 7 train screeches along track's edge. I map a path back to my mother and her mother, one purging her life of detritus, old LPs, books she will not read, husbands, and the other's urge to hang on to it all, her hoard of VHS tapes featuring nations she will never see for fear of flying, form a wild topography in her hallway. I follow the line back from Flushing and Laurelton out to that first Jamaica, sunken redbird train snaking an undersea railway stretching from Queens to Plantation Heat in Kingston and St. Anne's Parish, out to an avenue named for my French Catholic forefather who crossed himself after coming in my Yoruba foremother. I dare myself to return, to want this return, cloud quiver above ocean reef, skirting the continent of what is. Soil. One letter away from soul, and last night I dreamed that you and I moved again, bringing all our plants with us. Soil from Boston, Morgantown, soil in pots our mothers gave us, mint from New York, lilies from Virginia. We brought our souls to this new place and made it our own, digging down to mycelium, remixing notions of home. More home poems. Queensboro. Any version of home I might own begins not in a room, but in the backyard where I first learned the names of flowers. Iris, forsythia, lily. The house was white with a clay tile roof. I earned my scars falling out of its crabapple tree, driveway tumbles on roller skates. My grandmother wasn't allowed in the house, but I remember watching her walk up and down the sidewalk on a summer day, full of her own madwoman power. I went outside to talk to her. I remember how she gave me a stick of mint gum, her makeup melting in the heat. I'm sure she had on the same purple dress she wore when my parents married. Purple is the color of mourning she wore my mother on her wedding day, as my father's Puerto Rican family celebrated. I mourn your terrible mistake. Any version of home must begin from the outside in, from Caribbean to New York, from the melanin in my skin to my heart muscle pumping in patois and Spanglish, and all the Englishes I have inherited, my colonized tongue perched in the eaves of my mouth. This is a poem that was recently published in Ploughshares. It's kind of a poem of mourning and hope, I guess, which is kind of where we all are in the midst of the end of the pandemic, almost. So Hadeology is the name of this poem, kind of the study of, Hadeology is the study of the planet Pluto. Of course, Pluto being Hades, the god of death. So it's kind of playing with that idea. Hadeology. Gravity is the weakest force, but it can bring a body down. An adjunct professor on concrete outside of a church, a hood entrepreneur on concrete outside of a 3-story walk-up, a schizophrenic son on concrete outside of his mother's apartment, a recent high school grad on a bathroom floor, a biking single mother on an 18-wheeler, a college student in his father's gun, trillium, cornflower, aster, honeysuckle, poinsettia, wild cane. We are electrons bound by nuclear pull, magnetism. We We spin out of orbit and are pulled back 1,000 times a day. I only learned today what makes a glass of water grow stale overnight. The obvious, dissolved gases, the strange, the presence of geosmin, molecule that sends Earth after rain. As a former outermost planet, Pluto once had my complete affection, but things change. Casey Goodson Jr. did not get to inspect his newly cleansed smile upon returning home. A good son, he carried a bag of sandwiches. Last year, a woman I know taught me a Turkish recipe for the purslane growing wild in my front yard. This year, the purslane did not return. Instead, another woman friend taught me to make tea from the rosemary growing rampant, because something always springs back. Gravity is fickle, after all. And I'll read this last poem before I guess we open for Q&A. It's entitled Street Corner Market, Philadelphia. I spot the gold fruit piled high in green paper baskets. Can't help the ooh that spills as I reach toward them. The moo-mooed woman standing in front of me turns, saying, "The smell brings me back to Virginia." High yellow, plum round, she tells me fields her granddaddy owned, sold, meadows she girled through. We talk counties, Carolina, Henrico. We talk tobacco, sunflower seed. We speak of what hung in those orchards. Though I've only known that land through car windows on visits to kin, and my orchards with city parks, mulberries fermenting on concrete, something in me understands the honey of child and field. She says, "I was home today watching TV and craving some sweet, some fresh, you know?" We dare one another to bite into our bounty before parting. Our teeth score skin, juice racing rivulets toward elbows. We give ourselves over to sweet. Thank you. So I guess
Are there questions? Are there anything
Yeah.
you would like to ask Amy?
I really enjoyed hearing you tell the truth.
Thank you.
You definitely deserve to close the book because it's almost as if I know you read it very well. And it's quickly, it really is a lot deeper than what it's. I mean, you know, there's so much in there.
There's a lot of, it's dense, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Really, it definitely is a lot of it.
Thank you. Yes.
I noticed you paint pictures with your words, and as you were reading, I could see things you were talking about. When you go out and you make your, do you see something that strikes you? What's your process?
It's a really good question. It's kind of varied. Sometimes it's just being out in the world and seeing something. Sometimes it's weeks or months later and I come back to something that kind of keeps recurring for me. There are certain things that I still haven't written about that are kind of images that keep on coming back. So I think, yeah, a lot of my work is very image driven. I kind of tend to see specific things and kind of look closely. I try to take a lot of walks by myself, so I'm not distracted by other people. I encourage my students to do the same thing, just so I can kind of engage with that. I often write about the past also, so I find that sometimes I'm kind of forced to imagine things I wasn't really there for, and kind of try to create that for myself. But yeah, I think that kind of there's a movement back and forth with that. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, where were you raised?
Mostly in Queens, in New York City. Yeah.
Okay, good. I mean, I feel soul and soil, you know, and I like the way you explain how you come and you plant yours and somebody else comes and they plant theirs and somebody else comes and they plant theirs and it all comes together into one. And I have to really dig that.
Thank you so much.
And I wonder about beyond.
Thank you.
I really like that.
Yeah, I got to go to the African American Heritage Museum in DC recently. There's a beautiful portrait of her there. Yes.
Did you really fly over the border wall?
I know, that's something I really did. And really that day there was news that a girl had died of dehydration that morning. And I really had to sit with that as I flew on a vacation that my husband and I were taken on vacation by a couple of friends of ours, timeshare, they invited us. And it was still this terrible feeling of, you know, I guess it's a wonderful thing that I have this privilege, but also just sitting with the sadness of that, how unfair that is. Yeah.
with your Spanish heritage, does that make it easier to read Tagalog with English in your poetry?
I grew up with a lot of languages in New York. I kind of mentioned that every alphabet thing, that's really real. There are signs in every language. So my stepfather is from the Philippines, and so I did learn some Tagalog from him growing up. My mother speaks Jamaican patois, which is just another dialect of English, really. And then my dad kind of speaks Spanish, but mostly with my grandparents. My dad's Puerto Rican. He doesn't really speak much Spanish at all. And I didn't really grow up being fluent in any other language than English. But I kind of heard these little pieces of other languages coming at me all of the time. And so it just kind of happened that they ended up in my work because they were always in the background or foregrounded in some way. So I feel like it's the experience with having multiple languages always coming at me kind of started to work its way into it. And some of it was really deliberate. And then I wanted to start thinking about what does it mean to grow up with multiple languages, and what does it mean when we can engage with language in a wide variety of ways. I'm also starting to see that language is just kind of another way of thinking, in a way that there are words in English that don't exist in other languages. There are words in other languages that don't exist in English. And those provide us with concepts that help us kind of create culture and create ourselves. So I'm constantly kind of thinking about how we can relay that in my work.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
Do you have children? And if you do they have your talent?
I do not have any children. I have 2 cats. They're quite talented. They can both play fetch. But I don't have any children, and it's something that we're still in conversation about. But yeah, that's something that is not there. I do know his nephew has this musical talent, and I think I might have a niece who might be moving in my direction, but we'll see. And you had a question?
Yeah, unless I misunderstood, but why wasn't your grandmother allowed in your house?
Yeah, I pulled a line out of that poem. I kind of want to put it back in. My grandmother caused a lot of hurt to my mother and aunt. And that little line, I guess, about the way that my grandmother behaved at my father and my mother's wedding is kind of part of that, letting them know that she was in mourning for my mother's marriage. She was not a delight. She's still with us, but she's has some very severe dementia now, which is really sad. She's not quite the person she was, but in a way that's kind of good, because the person she was quite difficult. But yeah, that was part of it. She borderline personality disorder. It's really, really sad. Yeah, family stuff. Yes.
I was curious how you were bridging the culture gap. I mean, you talked about the bridge down state across
Yeah.
Between New York City and West Virginia, there's a lot of differences. And specifically, did you find it odd that your university where you teach has a mascot that runs around the stadium and bus skids
Shoots a gun? Yeah, it's a unique experience. Let's go, right? So it's a unique experience. I think I actually missed a poem that was about my Morgantown. It's titled Morgantown, West Virginia. It's got a little curse in it if you all want to hear it. Yeah, the curse is just the name of, there are college students around, and so they name their Wi-Fi various fun things. Just kind of gives you a little sense of my Morgantown experience. Morgantown, West Virginia. The neighborhood Wi-Fi network list runs from FuckPad to Xfinity. Across the street, a dog won't stop barking. It's cold and he whines like a whimpering child. Maybe it's the sound of the train whistle that upsets him. We're far from needing the warning in this bed that smells of fabric softener and the soft pepper of cats. Trains carry the coal that brings back the money that state politicians will use to gussy up the now flooded golf course and resort they frequent, to hire some university professor with dusty books she can't part with even after 4 states. Little gets spent on the miners' safety, on their shattered children, tracks on their arms forming maps of constellations they'd like to become someday. So working on that currently. I have a manuscript out that's titled Makeshift Altars, and that is kind of going out into the world right now. Hopefully by the end of this year, I'll be able to say yes. I do have a book contract. Sorry? The title is Makeshift Altars at the moment. It might change through the publication process, but I'm sending it out right now. So hopefully I'll have my own book. And then of course, I will have an anthology published with West Virginia University Press titled Essential Voices. And it really focuses on folks who were at the front lines in various ways during the pandemic. So we have a lot of folks who were incarcerated during the pandemic and kind of collect the writing of incarcerated people, people who are essential workers, a lot of healthcare workers, folks who work with the homeless, and really try to kind of incorporate voices of multiple people who have pre-existing illnesses, people who are elderly and afraid of getting sick and trying to avoid family, even though it's the one thing that they wanted the most. But really beautiful work from all across the world, actually, by really phenomenal writers. So I was able to kind of work that through with my co-editors and collect those really wonderful pieces. We went through about 1,000 people who kind of sent in. We had 1,000 pieces. We ended up with over 100 contributors. We have visual art as well as poetry, fiction, and essays.
Amy, is there a, if this isn't asking too much, is there a particular anecdote that you can recall from the anthology that you could share with us that wouldn't take terribly long to share, that really struck you, took your breath away?
Sure. I'm trying to think about this. I think really a lot of the work that was most striking for me was the work of folks who were incarcerated, or previously incarcerated, writing about their experiences being imprisoned during COVID. And about the relationships that they had with other prisoners, with really deep, meaningful relationships with other people, and watching those other people get sick. And I felt that was really interesting. There's also one of the first pieces that we ever looked at as we're just starting the process was from someone who was incarcerated. You know, a lot of folks mailing stuff in because they did not have access to email. So we had a PO box that we'd set up. And one of the very first things that I looked at was this beautiful piece of artwork and poetry by a writer named Luis Perez. And it was just the most astoundingly beautiful poem about nature, written by a man who'd been incarcerated for many years. And so I think that those are the things that were really moving and powerful for me. We actually are publishing the actual image that he sent. So like the artwork and the writing that he typed with a typewriter will be in the book as an image. So that's one of the things that I think was really astonishing for me.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. Yes.
I sent your picture to my friend, in Puerto Rico. I met him in a concert. And I don't see differences. Like color, like when you read about I don't see that. And I don't understand why people need to make all that an issue. Even prisoners, why we have to divide each other and label instead of red. I went to see a band from Angola called HU up in Pittsburgh. And they were their native guard, they don't speak English, they have their instruments, and it was like that was a perfect piece. And I wish the world could get that way, where all the differences were beautiful instead of divided. But I did send him a picture. He lives in a place where the big telescope is.
Oh yeah,
Arecibo,
yeah. There was some issues, yeah. Yeah, with Hurricane Maria, yeah, there was some damage done to that big, wonderful telescope.
He went back there, I met him when he was in Pittsburgh, he went back there to take care of his Asian parents. He lived through all the hurricanes and no water for a year, and his attitude is just awesome.
Yeah.
But I wish that for everybody, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Absolutely. I feel like one of the reasons I write a lot about and name race in my work is in part just to kind of, I think that sometimes being white is an identity, right? So why is it so often invisible in writing, right? When you say a man, woman, or girl, the first thing that oftentimes people imagine is a white man, woman, or girl. So I'd like to name that it is indeed a white man, woman, or it is a black boy, or whoever it might be. Because yeah, those differences exist, and it's okay to name what they are as long as we're not naming them in a way that is derogatory or that is pointing it out in a way that's mean-spirited, but it's more so just like, here's the observation, here's what it is, here's who exists in the world, and that's okay. Yeah, right. We should naming the colors of flowers doesn't make them maybe less beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. Other questions, comments, thoughts from folks?
One quick one.
Oh, sure.
Since you deal with issues of race, how did you see the debate in our legislature where they came to the case of passing that critical race theory thing? It didn't pass as far as I know. And, I'm a retired college professor. I simply saw it as a censorship threat.
Right.
And But how did you feel about it? Is that they couldn't define it, of course.
Right.
Which made it more dangerous, in my view.
Right. And what else is being centered? I mean, even looking at Florida right now, don't say gay, like all that's very, very frightening. So I just taught a class this past semester on Black Appalachian poetry and poetics. So looking at folks who are from the region, who are writing in the region, about the region. And I couldn't have had those conversations with my students. There was there's even a student who complained that like there was one day we talked about, there was one poem one day that we talked about that was about basically this poet writing about how Black people are oftentimes afraid of the police because of the long history. I mean, basically the existence of policing in the United States goes all the way back to the slave trade, and how basically the police originally were invented to take people who had escaped as slaves who were heading north back to enslavement. That was the whole original purpose of policing. That's how it began. And then of course became, to serve and protect, but that's not how it started in the US. So having that conversation, I had a student that complained, it's just like, well, like I felt that everyone was saying that all the police are bad. And it's like, I don't remember the conversation quite going that way. But they're like, I didn't feel comfortable saying anything. It's like, well, maybe you should have spoken up so we can have a larger conversation. But that was what was in the comments at the end instead of something that was said in class. And again, I tried to avoid some of that even because I was just like, I don't know how that will go in this primarily white classroom as we're talking about Black poets and poetry in this region. But yeah, it was really mortifying to me. That there's censorship, that people are thinking about what can and can't be said in a classroom. That's utterly ridiculous. Students have the right to have those conversations, as difficult as they might be, and teachers should be able to feel those conversations and help to kind of coach students through how we talk about difficult feelings, and how we kind of look at reality and try to work through it together. So I think that was quite frightening to me and something that I worked with my colleagues to push back on, but and of course it came at a time it's really hard for a lot of teachers because it's right smack dab in the middle of when things were heating up during the school year. So how can we kind of divide our attention between our teaching and then taking care of legislation as well? But yeah.
Did you ever consider this area right here, Morgantown, circle, south?
That's a really good question. When I got here, it was really complicated. No, I'll say that. Appalachia's unique. It's not south. It's not north.
We know.
It's not Midwest. It's unique. There I see parallels with Southern culture and foodways, especially, right? There's some food things that we do share with the South here. But Appalachia is its own special, magical thing. It is not South. It is not East. It is not Midwest. It is Appalachia. There's some Southern elements though. I remember in Pittsburgh, the first day I was ever really in Pittsburgh, it was Easter Sunday, and there were people promenading in their Sunday bests, like on the river, and I was just like, this feels like something out of like a Southern novel. Like I can't quite grasp this. That was the most Southern thing I ever felt, and it was in Pittsburgh. But no, Appalachia is unique. Honestly, I feel more like I'm in New York when I'm in Appalachia. There's an honesty, a kindness, but a bluntness that I appreciate. You know what I mean? People don't think of New Yorkers as kind. We're kind. We're not always nice, but we're kind. And I feel like Appalachia's the same. People may not always be like nicey nice, but people are kind and good. You know what I mean? Like there's an undertow of kindness, but they will tell you what they need to say. I appreciate that. So,
That was going to be the next part of my question, but you answered it because I just wondered how difficult it was to translate.
I honestly felt more at home here when I got here than I did in Boston. I'll say that. I think there's more commonality in terms of how people are here and in New York. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Just one, since you touched on that, but since you're in Morgantown, and because of the university, I would imagine you're on an island of liberalism.
Mm.
But I know from traveling through the state that it's extremely conservative and sometimes frightens me when I see a lot of signage and things that are posted on the sides of buildings and barns and stuff. But do you find yourself sort of protected while you're in Morgantown, and how does that feel when you go out, like you went down to Fayetteville, etc.?
That's a really interesting question. There are times when I do leave Morgantown and I see certain signage, things that feel hateful, and that's really problematic. But I would say that what I find I have an island of, because Morgantown actually does have a lot of differing opinions, especially in classrooms. I teach a lot of freshmen who are kind of coming out of those smaller towns or kind of coming in and kind of, thinking about those attitudes, and kind of, some of them really holding on, some of them kind of being more open to hearing some other things. But I think that, yeah, there's some fear sometimes, there's some discomfort, but I feel like at least in the classroom, there are conversations that are being had. I remember in 2016 when Trump was elected, I had a student who had been talking a lot about a young white man. I can't remember where he's from. He's from West Virginia, and he was talking about how he grew up with a neighbor who was one of the first Black athletes to play football. It was in WVU, and how he interviewed him and how he built this relationship with him. And he saw him as a mentor. And this student also came in on the day that Trump was elected with the Trump 2016 T-shirt on and right into class, and was super excited. And there were other students who were absolutely terrified. I had one student who said that his cousin was in North Carolina, a young trans woman. He was really worried about her safety. And so there were just a lot of students, a lot of concerns. So they were all having conversations about the Electoral College that day, randomly. A lot of people were writing about it. They had options about what they could write about, something a lot of folks chose. And they had some really healthy conversations about what it means to have a voice in government, and what it means for people to feel safe. And that student with his Trump t-shirt on started to kind of realize, oh, there are people who don't feel safe, and that really makes me feel sad. I don't see it that way, but that makes me feel like that kind of started to shift something for him. So yeah, I feel upset sometimes, but sometimes, at least in the classroom, I'm watching people have transformative conversations and experiences, and that makes me feel a little bit more like maybe things are going to be okay.
I hope you're right.
I know. I don't know. That's the most hopeful thing I can deal for you right now. That's all I got.
Anyone else? Well, let's give, do you want to mention Jerry's concert?
Oh, sure. Jared. So Jared is my husband. He's sitting right there if you want to wave. He has a students. He's the director of jazz studies at WVU, and his students have a performance coming up, a jazz performance here in Wheeling, which he's grabbing the date for right now. If folks are interested, Mark just mentioned it to me, and I was just like, sure, I can make a plug for him.
It's Friday the 19th. So our classes start on Wednesday the 17th.
This is in August.
I'll have my students performing on Friday the 19th here. I'm not sure the exact time, but I think it is 7 p.m. and it's at Market Square, which I know is just right around the corner.
Yeah.
Market Square.
Yes, so
Friday the 19th.
of August. Yeah, you can name that month. We've got a couple more summer
It'll be
months.
West Virginia University Big Band. It's a jazz ensemble, 18 players. And given that we won't have too much rehearsal time, it will likely be a standard one big band.
And lots of improvisation?
Oh, yeah.
Solos.
What's that name?
Friday, August 19th. And I'll be welcoming my new grad assistant from Malaysia and another grad student who's coming from Brazil. So we'll have an international rhythm section.
Wow.
Please give Amy a big round of applause. Thanks everybody for coming out. See you in the next one.